The Alpha King never smiled until he saw a girl in a bloody wedding dress escaping a forced mating. The night air was thick with fog, and the pale moon struggled to pierce the dark canopy of the forbidden woods. Somewhere in the distance, the river gurgled quietly, its silver surface reflecting shards of moonlight. Leora ran, her bare feet leaving fleeting prints in the damp earth. Her dress, once pure white, was torn and stained with deep crimson. Each step made the fabric cling to her, heavy with blood and fear. She could hear the distant shouts of guards behind her, their torches casting long, flickering shadows that chased her like specters. She had no time to think, only to run. Every nerve in her body screamed that she must not stop, must not let them catch her. The forced wedding had been a nightmare, a ritual meant to bind her to a lord she had never known, a man whose ambition had no room for mercy or compassion. She had refused, but refusal carried a price. Her own blood had become the symbol of her rebellion. Leora stumbled over a gnarled root, collapsing onto her hands. Her chest heaved with exhaustion, but she forced herself up. She had heard the legends of these woods, of spirits and creatures that had once haunted kings and queens alike, but she had no choice. Even a cursed path was better than death at the hands of men who would treat her as property. Far above the tree line, a shadow moved with uncanny silence. The Alpha King, Kaal, rode his black stallion with a grace that was both terrifying and commanding. Known to his people as the ruler who never smiled, Kaal had claimed the throne through cunning, strength, and fear. His eyes, cold as winter ice, scanned the forest below. For decades he had walked alone in the world of men, a solitary king feared by both allies and enemies, and tonight, something had shifted. He saw her. At first, it was only a flash of white and red, moving too swiftly for the eye to catch clearly, but something in her flight, her desperation, called to him. He had never smiled at the sight of life, nor death, nor any who lived under his rule. Yet tonight, there was a flicker, a spark of curiosity, almost amusement, in the depths of his pale eyes. The guards had not seen her yet. They were clumsy, bound by orders and hierarchy, while she moved like a shadow, slipping between the trunks and roots. Kaal's horse moved without sound, guided by instinct more than training, and he followed, silent and unseen.
Leora's mind raced with panic.
The forest seemed alive, closing in around her. Strange whispers brushed past her ears, though there was no wind. The moonlight revealed fleeting glimpses of shapes in the trees, pale, twisted figures that vanished when she tried to focus. She faltered, falling into a small clearing, and then she heard it. The low growl of a wolf. The sound was unnatural, hollow, and filled with malice. Her eyes widened in terror as a massive wolf, its eyes glowing silver in the dark, stepped into the clearing. Its fur was as black as midnight, and it moved with an elegance that belied the danger it carried. Leora's heart froze. She had heard tales, the cursed wolf of the forbidden woods, a creature bound to death and magic. She tried to flee, but the creature was faster, its jaws snapping inches from her ankle. Panic seized her, and she tripped, sprawling on the cold ground. The wolf crouched, preparing to strike, and then a shadow fell over it. Kaal stepped into the clearing, tall and imposing, his cloak brushing the forest floor. His presence alone seemed to push the fog back. The wolf growled at him, but Kaal's icy gaze met its silver eyes. With a calm, commanding tone, he spoke a single word, and the creature froze. It snarled, unsure, then slunk back into the shadows, disappearing like mist. Leora, still on the ground, stared at him in disbelief. She had run from kings, guards, and death itself. Yet here stood a man who was more fearsome than any she had seen, and he had stopped the cursed wolf with nothing more than his gaze. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're the Alpha King? Kale's eyes softened, just slightly, as he looked down at her. I am, he said, his voice deep, resonant, and strangely comforting despite the authority it carried. And you are not supposed to be here. I'm running, Leora said sharply, trying to push herself up. From them. They were going to... She paused, realizing she could not speak the horrors of that night. Kale watched her closely. There was fear in her, yes, but also something else. Defiance, fire. She had not begged for mercy, nor had she trembled completely. That spark, that audacity, had captured his attention in a way no plea ever could. You cannot stay here, he said finally. The woods are no longer safe for you. Leora shook her head. I cannot go back. Not to them. Not ever. Kale's gaze lingered on her, piercing yet gentle. Then follow me, he said, and with a single motion, he turned, beckoning her to rise. They moved silently through the trees, Kale guiding her with uncanny precision. The forest seemed to respect him, parting at his approach, revealing hidden paths that Leora had never noticed before. The tension between them was thick, she wary of his power, he intrigued by her courage. Neither spoke for some time. The only sound the soft pad of her feet on moss and the distant howl of a lone wolf. Finally, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, Why are you helping me? Kyle did not answer immediately. He did not often speak of himself, and he rarely revealed any reason for his actions. Because you are alive, he said at last. And because you are not like the others. Leora did not understand fully, but she felt the weight of his words. She had spent her life being told she was powerless, replaceable, and insignificant. Yet this man, this terrifying, silent king, had noticed her, not as a prize, not as a subject, but as someone who mattered. They reached the edge of the woods just as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. Leora could see the castle in the distance, tall and imposing, its towers like sentinels watching over the kingdom. Kale slowed, letting her catch her breath. "Ooh, you will stay here," he said, nodding toward the shadows of the outer walls. "For now."
You are safe under my protection. Protection? Leora repeated, her voice skeptical.
I can't trust anyone. Kale's lips curved just slightly in a motion almost imperceptible. For centuries, he had never smiled. And yet now, in the pale light of dawn, at the sight of a girl who had defied death, a shadow of a smile crossed his face, not cruel, not amused, but something far more dangerous, a spark of interest, of curiosity, of something he had not felt in decades.
Trust is earned, he said simply, and I will not ask it of you.
Not yet? Leora looked at him, her chest heavy with exhaustion, relief, and the faintest hint of hope. Bathed in the mine, the cursed woods, the wolves, and the men who wished her harm. And now, for reasons she could not yet understand, a king had taken notice of her. But even as the sun rose, spilling golden light across the forest, there was no time for comfort. The shadows that haunted both the woods and the kingdom were not so easily banished, and deep within her, Leora felt the first stirrings of a fear that would not leave her, a sense that her escape was only the beginning. Kale turned his gaze toward the horizon, as if sensing the coming storm. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, and his expression hardened once more. The Alpha King had smiled once in decades, but the darkness that ruled his kingdom was far from over. Leora followed him silently, her mind a whirl of fear, awe, and something she could not name. She had fled one nightmare, only to step into another, one ruled by a king who had never known joy until now. until and somewhere, in the far reaches of the forest, eyes glimmered in the shadows, watching them. The night had not finished with her yet. The chase had ended, for now. But the story of the girl in the bloody wedding dress and the Alpha King who had never smiled was only just beginning. The castle loomed like a fortress of shadows as Leora followed Kaal through its cold stone halls. The rising sun glinted faintly on the tall, iron-studded doors, but inside, the light struggled to reach the corners. The walls whispered of power and secrets, of decisions made in silence, and lives weighed on balances no one else could see. Leora's heart beat unevenly, part fear, part awe. Kaal's presence beside her was like a shield of steel and ice. He did not speak much, only guiding her silently past the soldiers and servants who bowed as they passed. Their eyes followed her. Curiosity mingled with caution. Leora felt the weight of the castle's gaze, yet in the shadow of Kaal's towering form, she also felt a strange sense of safety. Where am I?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The castle," Kaal replied simply. His eyes, pale and sharp, scanned the hall as though anticipating every threat. "And for now, it is your sanctuary." "Sanctuary?" Leora echoed, uncertain. Her mind raced with memories of the wedding, of the terror that had chased her through the forest. "I don't belong here. I'm nothing." Kaal's gaze softened briefly as he studied her. "Nothing?" he murmured, as if tasting the word. "You are alive. That alone gives you power in this kingdom." She looked at him, startled. No one had ever told her that her life mattered, that her survival could be more than a burden. Kaal, the king who had never smiled, had smiled at her once. Now he was speaking words she could barely believe. Yet the unease returned quickly. She could see it in his stance, the tension coiled in his muscles, the way his hand hovered near the hilt of his sword. This was a man who ruled with fear, who had survived battles and betrayal alike, and she was just a girl who had fled a wedding. "You must rest," Kaal said finally. "You have run far, and danger is not yet past." He led her to a quiet chamber tucked away from the main corridors. The room was simple, yet elegant. Tall windows, heavy curtains, and a bed large enough for a king. Leora sank onto it, trembling. She felt like a child again, vulnerable and uncertain. Kaal studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "I will not leave you entirely alone, but you must sleep. You will need your strength." And with that, he turned and left, his cloak brushing the floor with a whisper. Leora watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and fear. She had escaped death only to be bound in the shadow of a king who could crush her with a glance. Night came slowly. The castle's corridors darkened, and the distant hum of torches gave the halls an almost eerie life of their own. Leora could hear the faint echo of footsteps, the whisper of wind through the open windows. She thought of the wolf in the forest, the cursed guardian that had almost claimed her. And now, she thought, there were threats even closer, lurking within these walls. But Kaal did not sleep. From the shadows of his chambers, he watched her through narrow slits in the stone. He had not intended to involve himself with anyone, yet the girl had ignited something in him that he had thought long dead. Her courage, her stubborn defiance, was a challenge to the cold order of his life. And then he thought of the curse. Centuries ago, a dark magic had been placed upon his family line, a magic that bound the heart of the Alpha King in chains of fear and pain. No love could survive him without breaking against his wrath. And yet, here was a girl, alive, defiant, and unbroken. Could she be the one to challenge what had held him for decades? The next morning, Kaal summoned the council. Leora was kept behind a screen, hidden from view, yet her presence was not unnoticed. Whispers rippled through the hall, questions of why the king had spared a girl who was no one of note. a survivor of scandal and blood. Cale ignored them all, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon beyond the castle walls. After the council ended, he returned to her chamber. "You will not be sent away," he said, his tone final. "But you will remain here, protected. You are not yet safe in the world outside these walls." Leora looked at him, fear and anger warring in her chest. "Protected or controlled?" she asked. "I cannot live locked away, watched like a bird in a cage." Cale's expression was unreadable. "I do not seek to control you. I seek only to keep you alive. There is a difference." She wanted to argue further, but she was too weary. She realized that no argument could keep her safe if Cale was determined to watch over her. So she said nothing, and the silence stretched between them, tense and electric. Days passed, and Leora began to notice the rhythms of the castle. The guards moved silently, the servants whispered of unseen dangers, and Cale's shadow seemed to linger in the corners of her vision. She also began to notice something else. His restraint. He did not force her to speak. He did not demand obedience, yet his presence was unyielding, unbreakable. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the towers, Kyle found her in the gardens, where the roses bloomed black under the twilight. She had been drawn there by the quiet, by the rare warmth of fading light. "You should not be here alone," he said, appearing silently beside her. "I wanted to breathe," Leora admitted, "to feel like there is life beyond walls and shadows." "Life," he said almost to himself, "is not given freely. It is claimed or taken." She looked at him, sensing both the weight of his words and the loneliness behind them.
"And yet, you protect me," she said softly.
He did not answer immediately. He turned his gaze to the horizon, where the last sliver of sun touched the mountains. "I protect only what I cannot allow to be destroyed," he said finally. "You are alive, and that matters." Wars. The words struck her, not as a promise, but as recognition. Someone, powerful and feared, had recognized her worth. For the first time in her life, Leora did not feel entirely invisible, but the peace was fragile. That night, distant drums echoed across the hills, the warning of enemies plotting against Cale, and perhaps against her as well. Shadows were gathering beyond the kingdom's borders, and even the Alpha King could not see all threats. Cale knew it. He felt the stirring of danger like a blade against his skin. The guards could not stop what was coming. Only vigilance, strategy, and perhaps something more, something he had never dared hope for, could save them both. He found Leora awake later, sitting by the window, staring at the moon. Her eyes reflected both fear and resolve. "They are coming," she said, almost to herself. Cale moved silently to her side. "Yes," he said, "and we will be ready. But you must trust me." I don't know if I can," Leora admitted, voice trembling. "I have trusted men before, and it only brought me pain." Cale's hand hovered near hers, not touching, yet the intent was clear. "I do not ask for trust lightly," he said, "but sometimes survival demands it." For a long moment they sat in silence, the air between them thick with unspoken words and emotions neither fully understood. Fear, awe, fascination, longing, all mingled in a tension that was both dangerous and intoxicating. Then a scream shattered the quiet. A distant cry, raw and desperate, carried through the castle halls. Leora's heart leapt into her throat. Cale's eyes narrowed, and his body tensed like a spring. "They have found you," he said softly, almost a growl. "Or someone like you, and they will not stop until they have what they seek." Before Leora could speak, he moved swift and commanding, disappearing into the shadows. She followed, barely keeping up as the castle became a maze of corridors and secret passages. Guards ran past shouting, their faces pale with alarm. They reached the high tower where the wind whipped through broken battlements. From there, the night stretched endlessly, a sea of darkness dotted with fires and movement. Figures approached in the distance, enemies, their intentions clear in their deadly approach. Kael turned to Leora. "Tonight," he said, voice low, "you will see what it means to survive under the rule of the Alpha King. But you must remember, survival is never without cost." Leora swallowed hard, fear and resolve warring inside her. The journey had only begun. She had escaped death once, but the shadows of the world were long, and Kael's kingdom and his heart were full of dangers she could not yet comprehend. And as the moon rose high, casting silver over stone and shadow, Leora realized that in the darkness of the Alpha King's world, she had found something unexpected, a spark of hope, and a thread of connection that could either save them or destroy them. The night had deepened, and the castle waited, and beyond its walls the world was moving, hungry and patient. The night air pressed heavy against the castle walls, and the wind carried whispers of danger. Leora stood at the high balcony of the eastern tower, her fingers gripping the cold stone railing. Below, the forest stretched into darkness, its secrets hidden in shadow. But the cries she had heard the previous night had not faded from her mind. Something was coming, something relentless, patient, and cruel. Kael appeared silently behind her, as though he had stepped out of the shadows themselves. His presence was a storm, quiet, yet impossible to ignore. Leora felt both safety and unease. He had saved her once, and yet she knew that even the Alpha King had limits. "They are closer," Kael said, his voice low, almost a growl. "I can feel it in the earth, in the wind. Tonight, they will test us." Leora turned to him, fear and resolve tangled in her gaze. I can fight," she said, though her voice trembled. "I will not be a burden." Kael's eyes softened just slightly, but the shadow of warning remained. "You are not a burden," he said, "but you are not ready for what comes next. That is why you must trust me fully." "I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice barely audible. The events of her past, the betrayal, the pain, all surged like a tide she could not hold back. "I've trusted people before, and it always ended in hurt." Kael's gaze held hers, sharp and unwavering. "Then perhaps it is time to learn a new kind of trust," he said. "Not blind obedience, but the courage to survive together." The sound of movement echoed through the halls, distant but deliberate. Kael's jaw tightened. "They are here." Before Leora could ask who, the outer gates of the castle rang with the clash of metal and the roar of men. Shadows surged through the courtyard, torches casting flickering light that danced across the walls. The enemy had come, faster and more organized than anyone had anticipated. Kael drew his sword silently, its black steel catching the moonlight. His presence was commanding, the Alpha King incarnate. Every movement precise, controlled, terrifying. "Stay behind me," he instructed, his voice firm but calm. "Do not leave this tower." Leora hesitated, then nodded. She could feel the tension in the air, the pull of danger and fear, and something deeper, the magnetic force of Kael's resolve. For all his power and legend, there was a vulnerability in him she could sense, a shadow lurking just beneath the surface. The attack came swiftly. Soldiers breached the outer walls, and the sounds of battle echoed through the castle like thunder. Leora could hear screams, the clash of steel, and the roar of men. Her heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to run, to hide, yet she could not turn away from the storm unfolding below. Kael moved like a phantom, his blade striking with deadly precision. Shadows seemed to bend to him, and men fell before him as though the very air carried his power. Yet even in the midst of battle, his eyes flicked to Leora, ensuring she remained unharmed. You are remarkable, he said quietly, almost to himself, as he dispatched another attacker, strong, defiant, and alive. Leora watched him, awe mingled with fear. She had never seen anyone like him, a man who carried the weight of a kingdom and yet moved with the grace of a predator. And she realized something dangerous. She was beginning to care. The battle raged on. Kale's soldiers fought valiantly, but the attackers were numerous, skilled, and relentless. Smoke and fire began to creep along the battlements, and the castle seemed to tremble under the assault. Leora's fear surged. She had survived one life-threatening ordeal, but this was something entirely different. Kael returned to her side when the battle paused briefly, his breath steady despite the fight. "You cannot stay hidden forever," he said. "You must learn to face the darkness. That is part of your survival."
"I'm not like you," Leora protested.
"I cannot fight like you. Her voice faltered as she glanced at the wounded soldiers, the burning banners, the chaos all around. "I can't even begin to." Kale's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "You do not need to fight like me.
You need to fight like yourself. That is enough."
His words struck her, igniting a spark of courage. Perhaps survival did not mean becoming someone else. Perhaps it meant embracing who she was, even in the face of impossible odds. But before she could process this, a dark figure appeared on the highest tower. A rival lord, cloaked in shadows and wielding magic that twisted the air around him. His presence sent a shiver through Leora's spine. He had come not merely to fight, but to claim, to bend the castle and its inhabitants to his will. Kale's jaw tightened. The true threat is here. The rival lord raised his hand, and a wave of energy surged toward the castle walls. Leora felt the heat, the pull of magic that was dark and unnatural. The stones trembled, and the air seemed to hum with power. Kale met the attack with his sword, deflecting the force with a strike that sent sparks into the night. Leora's eyes widened. Magic, real, terrifying magic, flowed around them, and she realized how small and fragile she truly was. Yet Kael did not falter. He was a storm, a shield, a king who had survived centuries of danger and betrayal. "You cannot face him alone," Kael said urgently.
"You must come with me now."
They moved through hidden corridors, the castle itself seeming to guide them, revealing secret passages that only Kael could navigate. Leora followed, her fear tempered by the realization that she was not alone. She had never known anyone like Kael, a man of ice and shadow, yet capable of protection, of care, of trust. They emerged in the inner courtyard, where the rival lord's forces pressed closer. Kael's sword met theirs, each strike precise, each movement calculated. And yet, the enemy was cunning, using shadows and magic to divide and disorient. Leora felt the weight of desperation. She could not fight, not truly, but she could move. She could survive. She could follow Kael, and perhaps, in her own way, she could help. Then, without warning, a bolt of dark energy struck near her, sending her sprawling to the ground. Pain shot through her arm, and she gasped, struggling to rise. Kael was there instantly, lifting her gently, his eyes blazing with fury. "You are hurt," he said, his voice a growl. "Do not move! I can help," Leora said, her voice shaking. "I can! You are alive," he interrupted firmly. "That is enough. Trust me." The words cut through her fear, grounding her. For the first time, she understood what it meant to be under Kael's protection. Not ownership, not control, but a fierce commitment that demanded both trust and courage. The rival lord approached, his dark aura swirling like a storm. Kael stepped in front of Leora, sword raised, eyes burning with intensity. "This ends tonight," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard like thunder. The clash was inevitable. Kael's strength and skill met the rival's dark power in a battle that shook the castle walls. Leora watched, torn between fear and awe. She had never imagined a fight like this, a battle where both skill and magic intertwined, where every strike carried the weight of life and death. And then, as the rival lord struck with a powerful spell, Baal Kale faltered, just for a moment. In that instant, Leora realized the fragility of even the strongest. She stepped forward instinctively, raising her hands as if to shield him, though she knew her power was nothing compared to his. Kale caught her glance, and a flicker of understanding passed between them. They were bound, not by magic, not by fear, but by trust, by the unspoken acknowledgement that survival was a shared effort. The rival lord's attack was deflected, Kale countered, and the courtyard erupted in sparks of magic and steel. Yet in the midst of chaos, Leora understood something crucial. She had survived once, but survival now meant courage, partnership, and an unspoken bond with the Alpha King. And then the rival lord retreated, disappearing into the shadows, leaving the courtyard in silence except for the crackling of fires and the groans of wounded men. Leora sank to her knees, trembling, exhausted, but alive. Kale stood over her, his sword lowered, yet his presence remained commanding, protective, and unyielding. "You fought bravely," he said quietly, though his eyes revealed more than words could. "Not with a sword, but with courage." Leora looked at him, awe and something deeper, something tender, fragile, and frightening, stirring in her chest. I could not have survived without you," she admitted softly. Kale's lips curved, almost imperceptibly, and for a brief moment, the Alpha King who had never smiled seemed human. "And yet you survived," he said. "Perhaps that is the greatest strength of all." As the night faded into dawn, Leora realized that the castle, the kingdom, and the shadows around them were not merely obstacles. They were the forces that shaped her, that tested her, that bound her in ways she did not yet fully understand. And in the heart of that storm, beside the Alpha King who had never smiled, she felt the first stirrings of hope, trust, and a connection that might one day defy even the darkest magic. Yet, beyond the walls, in the whispering woods, a shadow stirred. The rival lord's power had not been broken. It had only been delayed. And both Kale and Leora would soon discover that the trials ahead would demand more than courage. They would demand the deepest strength of the heart. The night had passed, but the storm was far from over. The dawn was pale, brushing the castle walls with light that struggled against the lingering shadows of night. The courtyard was quiet now, but the air hummed with tension. Fires had been extinguished, soldiers tended to wounds, and the castle itself seemed to hold its breath. Leora stood near the center of the courtyard, her dress still torn from the battles, her hands trembling slightly. Kyle approached her silently, his black cloak billowing behind him. He looked every bit the Alpha King, tall, commanding, a figure carved from shadows and steel. And yet today there was a difference. Today he did not just rule with fear. Today there was a fire in his eyes, the fire of someone who had something to protect, something worth surrendering to. "The enemy will return," he said softly, his voice low yet steady. "And when they do, we must be ready. But this time, we do not face them alone." Leora swallowed, her pulse quickening. She had survived attacks, ambushes, and curses, but now she sensed the final trial approaching. The rival lord had not been defeated, he had only been delayed. His dark magic pulsed somewhere beyond the forest, biding its time. I will fight," she said, her voice firm, though she felt the tremor of fear beneath it. "Not like you, but I will fight." Kale studied her for a moment, eyes narrowing with pride and caution.
"Then you must trust yourself as much as you trust me," he said.
"Tonight, survival will demand more than courage. It will demand understanding, sacrifice, and connection." Leora nodded, understanding in her bones what he meant. She had seen him fight, felt his power, and witnessed the weight of the curse that had ruled his life. The Alpha King could crush all who opposed him, yet he could not touch the one thing he desired most: freedom of the heart, the ability to love without destroying what he loved. As twilight approached, the rival lord's forces emerged from the forests like a tide of shadows, cloaked in dark enchantments that twisted the air around them. Their leader raised a hand, and a surge of black magic rippled toward the castle walls, shaking stone and earth alike. Cale moved first, stepping between Leora and the incoming wave of power. His sword, forged from the hardest steel and blessed by ancient rites, absorbed the energy, sparks flying as he parried and redirected it. Leora watched, heart pounding, as he moved like a storm incarnate, precise, lethal, yet controlled, a balance of power and purpose. "You must stay close," Cale commanded, his voice cutting through the roar of battle. "And remember, survival is not enough. You must endure." "I will," Leora said, her voice steady, and in that moment she understood something vital. She was not merely surviving. She was learning to stand, to face darkness alongside someone who could guide her without controlling her. The rival lord unleashed another wave of magic, more powerful than the first. The castle trembled, stones cracked, and a fissure opened near the main gate. Soldiers were thrown aside as dark energy ripped through the courtyard. Leora stumbled, nearly falling into the chasm, but Cale's hand was there instantly, gripping hers. "Do not fear," he said, his voice a low growl, full of command and reassurance. "I will not let you fall." She looked into his eyes, seeing the truth there. A king who had ruled through fear, yes, but who could also protect with devotion. She felt something stir in her chest, trust, fragile and powerful, weaving a connection that neither time nor darkness could sever. Cale turned his attention back to the rival lord, his sword raised high. The clash was inevitable. Steel met magic, light clashed with shadow, and the courtyard became a whirlwind of sparks, flame, and energy. Leora's heart raced. She had never witnessed a battle so raw, so charged, so alive with peril. And then, a moment came when Cale faltered, struck by a surge of magic that he could not fully block. The ground shook beneath him. Leora's instinct overtook fear. She stepped forward, reaching out as if to shield him, though she had no power to stop the spell itself. Cale's eyes met hers, sharp and intense. "No!" he shouted, yet there was something more in his gaze, an acknowledgement that her courage mattered, that she was no longer merely a witness. She was part of the storm, part of the fight, part of the heart that had been missing from his life. The rival lord advanced, confident, his magic swirling around him like a black tempest. Cale met him head-on, steel striking energy with a force that made the earth tremble. Sparks flew, and the world seemed to slow. In that suspended moment, Cale realized what had always been missing. Not power, not fear, but connection. The girl beside him, who had survived impossible odds, had become the key to his freedom. The spell struck, but Cale countered, using every ounce of skill, every ounce of experience, and every ounce of emotion he had withheld for decades. The rival lord's magic faltered, and for a moment, victory seemed within reach. "Now!" Cale shouted to Leora. "The spell. You must break it." Leora hesitated. Her hands trembled, but she remembered the lessons of survival, courage, and trust. She closed her eyes, reaching into herself, into a strength she had never known. The warmth of Cale's trust and the bond that had grown between them gave her courage. She focused, and a pulse of energy, fragile but real, surged outward. The rival lord screamed, his magic unraveling like threads of shadow torn apart. Cale moved swiftly, disarming him and forcing him back into retreat. The enemy fled, leaving only silence, smoke, and the echoes of battle. Leora collapsed to her knees, exhausted, trembling, but alive. Cale was beside her in an instant, his hand steadying her. "You are stronger than you realize," he said softly. Almost in awe, she looked up at him, meeting the eyes that had once seemed impenetrable, cold, untouchable. I could not have done it without you, she whispered. Kale's lips curved, slowly, deliberately, a smile that was rare, almost legendary.
And yet you have done it, he said. Together, we are
more than survival. We are strength, courage, and perhaps even redemption.
The castle, though scarred by battle, seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging the bond that had been forged in fire and fear.
Soldiers looked on in awe, not just at Kale's power, but at the courage of the girl who had stood beside him. Night gave way to dawn once more, painting the courtyard in soft gold and pink. The rival lord was gone, the immediate threat vanished, and yet both Kale and Leora knew that darkness never fully disappeared. It lingered, patient and watchful. But they had survived. They had faced what seemed impossible, and together they had emerged stronger. Kale turned to Leora, his eyes gentle but commanding. "You have changed things," he said, "not just for yourself, but for me, for the kingdom, and for what comes next." Leora's breath caught. "Changed me?" Kale's gaze softened. "Changed us?" he said.
I have walked centuries alone, believing that no one could ever enter the heart of the Alpha King without being destroyed. But you
have shown me that trust, courage, and care can exist even in the darkest of places, and in doing so, you have changed me." Tears pricked at Leora's eyes, though she refused to let them fall. She had been broken, hunted, and terrified, yet here, in the shadow of the Alpha King who had never smiled, she felt seen, valued, and alive. "Then, what happens now?" she asked softly. Kale's hand reached for hers, and when he touched it, it was neither possessive nor commanding. It was steady, grounding, and full of unspoken promise. "Now," he said, "we begin, not as king and subject, not as master and survivor, but as two people who have faced darkness together. We begin with trust, with courage, and perhaps with love." The words hung in the air, delicate yet powerful. Leora felt a warmth spread through her chest, a spark of hope that had been absent for so long. For the first time, she imagined a future not dominated by fear, not shadowed by oppression, but filled with possibility. Kale stepped back slightly, allowing her space, yet his presence remained a constant pillar beside her. They stood together on the castle balcony, overlooking the kingdom bathed in the soft glow of dawn. The world was vast, filled with shadows and threats yet unseen, but in that moment, neither fear nor darkness could touch them. And far beyond the forest, hidden in the lingering mist, a faint movement stirred. The enemy had not vanished entirely. The shadows waited, as they always did. But Kale and Leora had faced the storm together, and that bond, forged in fire, fear, and courage, would endure whatever came next. The Alpha King smiled fully now, no longer the cold, untouchable figure of legend. His smile was rare, fragile, and filled with depth. And Leora, the girl who had fled a bloody wedding, stood beside him, alive, courageous, and transformed. The kingdom watched, the winds whispered, and the world shifted ever so slightly. Darkness would return, as it always did. But in that dawn, hope had been born. Love, trust, and redemption had emerged from the shadows, as vivid and unyielding as the light breaking over the castle walls. The story of the girl in the bloody wedding dress and the Alpha King who had never smiled reached a turning point. Not the end, but a beginning. A promise that even in the darkest world, hearts could find courage, survival could become purpose, and love could bloom where fear had once ruled.